listener production.
Hey, Chris Spyrou with you. Welcome to this special edition of the Afternoon Briefing. Music reality TV is a seductive dream factory, with blockbuster shows like Australian Idol and The Voice still promising to turn regular suburban Aussies into overnight stars. And they couldn't do it without the millions of people, just like you and I, who sit in our lounge rooms being the country's greatest couch critics and fanboys and girls watching on each and every show. But a new listener documentary podcast called The Moment It Changed Touchdown lifts the lid on the reality of manipulation, humiliation, and exploitation behind the scenes that we don't get to see on our TV screens.
And we're live in 3, 2...
For over 2 decades, a promise has echoed in the living rooms of millions of Australians. Instant fame and fortune. A shortcut to superstardom. Australian Idol, X Factor, The Voice. They turned ordinary people into overnight sensations. But why did so many winners seem to vanish just as quickly as they appeared? I'm Nic Kelly, and this is The Moment It Changed Touchdown. The untold story of music reality TV in Australia.
I dare you to go on a show like Australian Idol and come out the other side with your mind and your heart and your soul still intact.
We're pulling back the curtain on the deals, the promises, and the machine that claims to make dreams come true. In this series, you'll hear from former contestants.
Did you used to be Millsy?
I'm not comparing Spyrou in any way, but they refer to it as Beatles-level hysteria.
Some sharing stories they've never told publicly before.
The moment that made Carice Eden who she was at that time, it caused a lot of pain and it caused a lot of hurt.
If you want to go past the top 100, you have to sign these 3 contracts.
What if I don't sign? Well, we would just replace you.
We'll hear from the judges, whose job it was to make or break contestants.
The Idol did require a bastard judge, and I guess I was happy to oblige.
And the people behind the cameras, pulling the strings.
The bad singers, we were directed to keep them.
What happened when the cameras stopped rolling?
Immediately following that performance, I had a panic attack.
Was very confronting, confusing and overwhelming.
Were these shows built to create stars, or just great TV?
I will never bash Idol. It built me my career and it has given me the path and the step to get into this industry.
Because there's a lot of people who can sing and ultimately, who gives a f***?
This is the true story behind Australian music competition television.
I'd probably tell my 18-year-old self, you're right, walk the f*** off that stage.
Nic Kelly is a former record label executive and the host of Touchdown, and he joined me last month to unpack what's been happening behind the curtains of Australia's reality music TV scene and why shows like The Voice and Idol are struggling to create household names more than 2 decades on. Here's that chat for you. Nic, welcome to the briefing. Why, in your opinion, haven't music reality TV shows like The Voice and Idol produced a household name in recent memory?
There are a number of factors to this, and we uncover this a lot in The Moment It Changed Touchdown, the podcast. One of those factors is the fact there is just so many ways to be a star these days, and so many ways to cut through as a musician. Or not cut through, because it is so fractured now. You think back to when Shannon Noll and Guy Sebastian was stood on the front steps of the Sydney Opera House in 2003, and the amount of eyeballs that were on that show, because there was no distraction. You didn't have people on their second screen watching something else on TikTok.
Yeah.
You had everyone glued to Australian Idol. So you had much more of a chance for these kind of artists to cut through when these shows were in their initial phases. What's happened since is artists have found a way to connect directly with fans rather than require the conduit of something like a reality TV show to connect to new fans and find new audiences. So these shows have the role of these shows has kind of really changed very rapidly over the last 10 to 15 years.
So to oversimplify it, it's literally a saturation issue.
It is a saturation issue, yeah. And the fact that these shows have remained on the air and some of them have beefed up their budgets since to try and claw back some of that audience. And also the fact that the audiences actually haven't declined enormously for these shows. The Voice still rates really, really well comparatively to where TV audiences are in total at the moment. The Voice is still rating really significantly. Australian Idol doesn't rate too badly either. There is still an appetite for the drama in these shows, but the conversion to making a superstar with a long-term career, which is something that seems to have vanished.
Well, speaking of this project, you've been a part of the Australian music industry for over a decade now. Was there anything that was uncovered in the series that shocked you?
I knew these stories, they were kind of open secrets, a lot of them. What did shock me was the honesty we got out of the folks we talked to. And there are some pretty high-profile people in here. Casey Donovan speaks to us. Dami Im speaks to us quite extensively about a really tumultuous experience working particularly with the record label that she was contractually obligated to sign to. So she signs this contract before the show even starts, and it requires her, if Sony Music want to pick her up, she has to sign with them for a multi-album deal. And the way that unraveled when she ended up going with them, releasing her first music, having some success initially in Australia and in Korea as well, and then it all kind of decays from there. And I think that was the sad thing for me that I didn't want to uncover, was the decay in these artists' mental health, the decay in these artists' careers, in their trust in themselves as a musician, that the things that the show is a catalyst for, signing a record deal, releasing records, those things really started to get away from what the artist actually wanted to be doing with their life. And yeah, you've got people like Rob Mills talking, Casey Donovan, Katie Underwood of Bardot, you know, back to pop stars in the 90s, which for some of your younger listeners, they may not be aware of that. But the core of their stories and the fact that this was like it was didn't really shock me. Another thing that shocked me was having the judges and executive producer of Australian Idol, Stephen Tate, is featured extensively in the show and talks about the fact that they really felt like they had to keep in the bad singers and, you know, really showed that this was a entertainment show more than it was an actual catalyst to break superstars.
Yeah. Well, I do want to touch on Dami Im for a second longer. I know she features quite heavily in the series and we hear from her first-person account. There's a moment there where she's talking about 2016, which for anyone who's unfamiliar with is ultimately the height of Dami Im's career. She's done Eurovision, she's placed second, which is like historic for Australia, but also Eurovision creates like global stars. Her record label didn't capitalise on that in the slightest, and that was something that she was quite disappointed in.
Yeah, 100%. And they almost forced her to do an album of covers of songs by the Carpenters rather than releasing and designing original material that was more true to her. And she'd had some fantastic success working with a songwriting duo called DNA and had a couple of big hits, including her song Super Love, which is an anthem for the ages. And they really kind of went away from that and went towards this more adult contemporary lane and tried to kind of just make these familiar songs that were easily digestible and easily churned out. What was also going on at the time, which we get into in the podcast, was a systemic issue with the culture at that record label at the time, which has since been kind of moved forward, and knowing what that record label's like now, it's a distant memory. But at the time, there was a lot of pressure inside that record label for someone like Dami to make them as much money as possible in the shortest space of time possible. And they thought doing covers of the Carpenters was the way to go with that, instead of, you're right, capitalising on a global moment and thinking about what she now meant to so many people.
Yeah, well, a central theme throughout this whole podcast is honestly the power of the higher-ups, whether it be the record labels, whether it be the production team behind these shows. We hear about several contracts. We hear about contracts that start before the shows start filming. We hear about contracts that last well until after these contestants have finished on the shows. What can you tell us about those contracts and essentially what role they played in the lives of these artists and the way that they were packaged and sold to Australia?
You understand why they have to sign these contracts. it's all about control. It's all about having complete control of the narrative that the TV show, the network, the record label want this artist to be perceived as. And that has to start very early on. So they get complete control of the narrative that's told on the show, the way they're positioned as an artist, and complete control of what they're allowed to say and not say as the show ends. And the good thing about doing this with a lot of these artists 10 years on is those contracts have finally expired. But what I think was, I'll leave people to actually listen to the podcast to understand it's too deep to go into in this conversation, but there were a number of layers of contracting involved that if you didn't sign, that you just weren't on the show. And a lot of these people have made this active choice to chase this fame or this moment for themselves. Sometimes it's a reclamation of their own identity. You've got to sign the contract if you want to appear on the show. What I find really interesting is the fact that in 2024, that contract that requires you to join that record label if you win, or even if you're in the top 12, if you appear on the show at all, they can exercise an option to sign you to a record label. That's now gone. So I think that's a really healthy step, and that's what really kind of makes me happy about where these shows maybe are going, is it's actually a cash prize now on shows like The Voice and Australian Idol. I believe it's $100,000 on Idol now, and you just get that. And you're not required to sign to a record label. There's still contractual obligations with the network and the production company, but no contractual obligations with a record label. So you get to use that money to produce the music you want, take the time to find the right record label, the right manager, the right artist team around you that helps you actually build a sustainable career and release the kind of music you want. We didn't get it right 20 years ago. And even 10 years ago. And there are still elements of now that we don't have it right. But there is an understanding now that forcing someone to sign to a record label they're maybe not the right fit for does not help anyone. No one wins there. Production company, record label, artist, no one wins. Giving them that cash prize and giving them the platform of a national TV show maybe helps them actually build a career. The only problem is there is also this kind of cringe factor around these shows as well. As good as they are, as much as they rate, it's hard to become a cool, credible, alternative artist if you want to become one by appearing on one of these shiny floor, Scott Tweedy microphone in hand kind of shows.
Yeah. Well, I mean, let's stick with the positives. Like you kind of mentioned there, the people have been able to build their careers, and these shows ultimately have changed a lot of lives, and sometimes for the better. From Australian Idol to The Voice, what can you tell us about this side of the story? What can you tell us about the positive side of this story?
Every artist that we spoke to on this show, despite how bad some of their experiences at the time had been, no one regretted going on the show. Everyone was grateful for what they learned from doing it, because the resilience some of these people had to learn. And there's people like Carissa Eden, who at the time was a household name. She matched a record only held by the Beatles on the charts at that point. And she even was grateful, and she had to go through it. There's an artist named Bella Ferraro that we talked to as well, who, again, household name for a couple of months there. Grateful for the experience because she knows how to navigate these things now. And I think that's what I liked about this, is it became a lesson of resilience for a lot of these people, and a lesson of how to navigate the music industry. I think the music industry is heading into a much healthier place, and, you know, I'm around it just as much as I was 10 years ago. The people that make the decisions, the people that are finding the artists are looking more broadly, looking with more of an open mind and thinking in a more mentally healthy kind of way as well. And that's what makes me excited about the future of not only the music industry, but these shows too, is that we're gone from the days of, I think people's bullshit detectors are much higher than they were before. So a lot of the manufacturing of kind of the controversial moments on these shows, and you hear the judges talk about, you know, being essentially told to ham it up, they're gone. And I'm really hopeful that these shows are creating a much healthier environment in the future, and that the artists that don't need these shows and manage to do this on their own terms are doing it in a much healthier way as well.
That was Nic Kelly there, host of The Moment It Changed Touchdown, which you can find in your feed now wherever you get your podcasts. That is it for this episode of The Briefing. We'll be back in your feed tomorrow morning. I'm Chris Spyrou. Catch you then.
Listener.